Okay, so this weekend was one of those weekends you see like once a year where like a whole bunch of stuff is coming out at once, and for me it was kind of three movies I was really looking forward to. Abigail, The Ministry of Ungodly Warfare, and Rebel Moon Part 2. And since I already did the first Rebel Moon, I would focus on Rebel Moon Part 2, and down the road I will do the other two. And so, yeah, I might regret my decision. I'm not sure. Let's get into it.
I'm sorry. I won't allow this place to die for me.
Okay, so back when the first Rebel Moon was like announced, I was a little intrigued by it because one, I'm a sucker for space opera, anything, and also I was interested that they weren't releasing the two movies a year apart. They were only releasing them like 3 months apart, which I had never seen anything like that before. I thought, wow, that's really interesting. And so I was really excited about it, and I reviewed Rebel Moon Part 1, A Child of Fire. And I was a little... It was watchable. I had some issues with it that I thought maybe the director's cut that's coming out this summer would fix, but for the most part, it was a fun evening, even though it had a lot of issues. And now that we've watched Part 2, I don't know. I mean, there are aspects to this I do like, but there's other aspects that do not stick the landing. And so, like, one of the things that Zack Snyder is infamous for is people love criticizing him for overusing slow motion. And yes, I will acknowledge that in some of his movies, it is overused. There's also other times in his movies that slow motion actually has some of the best moments in said film, and it actually works great. So I've never been a huge criticizer on Zack Snyder's slow motion. Boy, did he overuse it in this movie. There's literally like this sequence where they are showing people farming, and it is like almost insufferable how much this sequence goes on for, simply because there is so much slow motion in this sequence. It's not even an action sequence. It's just people doing farming, and it's just slowest farming montage ever. Now, that being said, there is actually this one really impressive slow motion shot about halfway through the movie where it's like this battle and like this big woof of like dust shoots into the scene, and then it settles and you see like all these like soldiers start walking through the dust. It's a pretty good looking shot, so I will give credit where credit's due. There is some of that pretty visually stunning Zack Snyder slow motion formula in here, but yeah, there's a lot of useless slow motion shots in this movie. I'm just thinking like they could be spending this time building the world a lot better. Another thing I did not like about this movie is some of the writing. Like, comparing this movie with the first movie, it really feels like a different writer wrote this film compared to the first one. There's some really, really bad lines in like the first half hour. There's some moments where like the actors, they are just not giving it their best, and some of them just don't feel like they want to be there. But I mean, other aspects to the writing just really don't feel in place. It feels like someone continuing a job after the first person left, almost, in terms of writing. And I'm only watching this 3 months later. I didn't rewatch the first one before watching the second one, simply because the director's cut of the first one is coming out this summer, so I didn't want to wear myself out on Rebel Moon, since I'm already going to be watching this movie or both of these films 2 more times later on this year. Because I do want to see the director's cut, although I would make the argument they should have just released the director's original intended version instead of doing this theatrical release and then doing this director's re-release. It's just, well, what's up with that?
What's up with that? What's up with that? What's up with that? Ooh, yeah.
But this story still has one of the biggest issues that I had with the first part, which is there is still a huge lack of world building and backstory on various things. Like, why is it that this technologically advanced galaxy has hover pallets for farmers, but they're still using old antique tools to harvest grain? I mean, you know, little tiny things like that. We get a little bit more backstory on some of the characters, and it's like, okay, one of the characters is a former prince. Do we find out anything about his kingdom? Not really, other than it was invaded. Like, just stuff like that. A lot of necessary backstory to kind of get us invested in these characters is still lacking. And will the 2 director's cuts alleviate this? I don't know. And then, like, going back to some of the things with the writing, like, there's this one flashback they do showing a very important event that happens in this universe, and for some reason the bad guy, when he's doing his evil maniacal move, he decides to have a orchestral band off to the side playing while he does his big brain move, and it's like, why? And it's just, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, the scene, like, the music's getting more and more, like, engrossing and emotional. It's like, oh, this is interesting. And why is there a band there playing? Like, really? Okay, sure, why not? And then, with the first half of this movie, there is, like, this really messy exposition dump with all of the Magnificent Seven characters, all of the wayward heroes that have come to defend this small village from an overwhelming force that's nothing like Magnificent Seven. But, I mean, like, it's just, they do their best to try and explain why they're doing it, but basically it's just like, hey, guys, we forgot to give every one of these characters, except you, interesting backstory in the first movie, so we got 7 minutes, go. Like, just everyone's back. Yeah, let's just go. And it's messy, it's unfocused, and just, it doesn't work. Now, once the main battle begins, the movie gets a lot better. But you have to sit through like an hour and 10 minutes to get to the main battle. And the, like, entire second half of this film is said main battle. It's kind of like 13 Assassins, or no, not 13 Assassins, 13 Samurai, where basically it's just a build-up for this one huge, big battle. And I did like that about this. I did enjoy that once the battle starts, like, this is the rest of the movie. And plus, the build-up to this was anticipated, because the first movie was building up to this, and then the first half of this movie was building up to this fight between the Empire and these peasants. And so overall, I did like how the battle played out, and even though they do utilize some things from other movies, I'll get to that in a moment, it was entertaining, and it was kind of the highlight of the film, as it should be, because that's what these 2 movies have been building up to. Now, one criticism I will levy against this film is the fact that you have this robot character. I forget the name he was called in the movie, but I'll just call him Robot. He's voiced by Anthony Hopkins, and you have this amazing actor who's like in his 90s. He can't really do anything physical anymore, and you have the chance of having a prominent character in a sci-fi movie being voiced by Anthony Hopkins, and they don't capitalize on that. I mean, seriously, this robot character could have been one of the main characters in these two films, and he's barely in the first one, and he's even in the second one less. And I had heard like rumblings that, oh, Anthony Hopkins' robot character is going to be far more prominent in the second film. Nuh-uh. He's barely in it. He shows up for one scene to talk to a character, he shows up for another scene to do his like action scene, and then he shows up at the end like, I will join you on your quest, and that's it. Subtle spoiler there, but I'm not really spoiling too much. So it's like, they should have utilized Anthony Hopkins more, especially since I don't know when they're doing a third one, and the guy might very well pass on before then. Which is unfortunate, because he has an incredible filmography of movies to his name. Plus, I found this funny. There are two lightsaber fights in this movie that are clearly not lightsaber fights, but we're going to act like they're lightsaber fights, even though they're not. If you get that reference, kudos to you. I mean, do these look great? Yes. But it's very obvious that they were doing lightsaber fights, and they were really skirted on the edge of trying not to get sued by Disney. And Disney's really bad about especially lightsabers. So that'll be interesting to see if Disney puts up a fuss over Rebel Moon having two non-lightsaber fights. And then another thing I was a little disappointed in is I was kind of told by, I don't know who, the director or news outlets, that this was going to be two movies and then the story was going to be done. The ending to this is left open for a sequel. Very left open for a sequel. And in recent news, Zack Snyder said, oh yeah, there could potentially be 6 more Rebel Moons. So he's pulling a James Cameron. And I don't know if this is going to have the fan base for 6 more. I could see them maybe doing 2 more and then finishing up that, but I mean, come on, the overall threat is not that interesting. The regent who's in charge of the Imperium, and I mean, I don't know, you're going to have to pull something amazing out of your ass to get 3 interesting. I don't know, maybe the 2 director's cuts that are coming out later this year for part 1 and part 2 will change my mind. But overall, I was disappointed in this one. I felt it wasn't as entertaining as the first one. And the first one, I gave a little bit more slack because I thought, it's building up to part 2. And now that I've seen part 2, it's like, I don't know if it was worth it. So maybe the director's cuts might change my mind. But overall, I felt this was a downgrade from the first one. Now, if you got nothing else to watch, these 2 back-to-back, you'll probably have a fun time. But if you're expecting for something that's going to surpass Star Wars and Star Trek and Mass Effect and Alien, this isn't it. I mean, there is fun to be had, but in the end, it was just mediocre. It had too many issues, and I think this really needs some fixes to the writing and maybe editing. And so, anyway, that's been my review of Rebel Moon Part 2, The Scargiver. And my name's Chris Rukoff, 11 Hour Reviews, and that will be all for today.